That's all the stuff I wanted to say.
And I think that was good too. Yep, that's a wrap.
All right, we're done.
Go see it.
Hey everyone, welcome to our show. Today we're going to be talking about Kimi. It is a film directed by Steven Soderbergh and starring Zoe Kravitz. It's rated R and streaming on HBO Max. During the COVID pandemic in Seattle, an agoraphobic tech worker named Angela is employed by a company that created Kimi, an Alexa-style device that listens to its customers. She discovers what appears to be a violent crime while listening to one of Kimi's data streams. She's met with resistance and bureaucracy when she tries reporting the incident. Angela realizes she must face her greatest fear by venturing out into the city streets among the populace. So Dan, what was your gut reaction to Kimi?
I loved it. I thought it was a nice, tight little thriller that sets up the characters, presents you with the catalyst that everything's going to hinge around, then ratchets up the tension and keeps it up right through the end.
Well, I have to say that was hilarious because I myself thought of it as a tight thriller, and I probably wrote that down in my notes multiple times. Honestly, I feel like this should have been titled How to Make a Movie, because he seriously technically, it's essentially perfect. Like, there wasn't really anything to complain about. And it's this great Hitchcock homage, which done right, I think is awesome. And this is a guy who's just got years of experience and he's just showing his craft. And I appreciated that very much. And I just thought that it was a movie with just no fat on it.
Exactly.
Every little bit was relevant to the plot in some way or another. Just well done.
Before I get into what I liked about the movie, I just want to say, just as kind of a side note, something that I really enjoy is when you get a chance to watch a movie not knowing anything about it ahead of time. That's something I really enjoy doing. If I hear a movie is getting good buzz, a lot of times I won't even watch a trailer. I'll just try to get to the theater and see it, or find it on streaming, just to be as fresh as possible. And so that's what I did here, is just going into it knowing nothing except the fact that Zoe Kravitz was in it, and just being pleasantly surprised by what I found.
I had the exact same experience because I think I had an idea in my head of what this movie was, but I don't think that I saw a trailer. And very quickly it was just like, whoa, this isn't really what I was thinking at all. Cool.
If you get a chance to sometimes go see movies without knowing about them, I highly recommend it. It's an enjoyable thing to do.
But it can backfire.
We are not held responsible if you get a real dud.
I will take this opportunity to say that one time I went with a buddy to see I Am Number 4 because we wanted to watch a movie and it was like, hey, sci-fi. And it took us about 15 minutes to go, this is based on a YA book, isn't it?
I also went to the theaters for that. My best example of a movie that I was able to go see based on a friend's recommendation and knowing nothing about it was From Dusk Till Dawn. And I must say, the turn in that movie was quite enjoyable when you don't see it coming and have no idea what the movie's about.
No kidding. Which, by the way, if you haven't seen it, would like to see it, don't look it up. Just watch it.
Mm-hmm.
So regarding Kimi, I like patient filmmaking. And I'm going to describe that specifically because I think there are movies that are just plain slow, and then there are other ones that are patient. And the ones that are patient are, they can be a slow burn. Sometimes they're just ones that they just take their time to let you absorb the story. And I feel like this movie started that way. I think the important thing that distinguishes the two is that in a patient film, you're not bored. This starts off with a interesting cold open that makes you wonder what's going on, but then it switches to your protagonist and you're seeing mundane stuff about her life, but it's helping you understand who she is. Now, a scene of someone brushing their teeth done the wrong way, you're just like, why isn't the plot happening? But in this movie, it felt like I'm picking up little tidbits, and I like that a lot.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I specifically had made a note of the fact that this movie does a great job of presenting information to you in a visual way through people's actions rather than like beating you over the head with explanation of things, and I am always a fan of that.
And I felt like they could have ruined that experience by cramming a bunch of exposition into 60 seconds so they could get to the running and chasing stuff, but they didn't.
Sure.
I really liked how the patient filmmaking had layers to it, because you have this person, and I feel like you're layering on a little more, and you understand a little better, and you understand a little better, and that continues until you get a fuller picture. And it goes through the entirety of the movie. not just the, beginning setup. I have to take an opportunity here, and I know I'm picking on somebody, but if anyone's ever seen the movie First Cow, that movie is so slow. And I'm not joking. The movie's like 2 hours long, and a dream project of mine is to cut it down to 90 minutes just by cutting all the dead air out of all the shots that didn't need to be there. I think it's a good movie, but it's hiding.
I hope you do that someday.
I would love to. I think there's a great movie with it's a good story, but it's just that sometimes you need to cut.
I want to say that I initially underestimated this movie because I perceived it as, oh, this is a clever way to do a COVID-era movie where you want to restrict the film to a single location with as few actors as possible. That's where I thought it was going, especially because they were referencing COVID and things in the movie. And so then when the movie suddenly opens up to a much larger world, I was pleasantly surprised.
I generally dislike COVID in movies and TV because for the most part it's like, we get it, we all live through it. Nobody wants to deal with it. Mm-hmm. But I thought that this was a movie that took perfect advantage of that as a situation because it was so relevant to the plot. And it wasn't, hey, COVID, right? So it worked. So the Hitchcock aspect was very strong, but it was very much appreciated. And one of the things I was thinking while watching it is, this is exactly the kind of movie Hitchcock would have made if he was active now. And it was just this wonderful job of blending modern issues into a Hitchcock thriller.
I hadn't thought of it that way.
There were some pretty direct references to Rear Window. I think if I was an even better student of Hitchcock, there's probably some other direct references that I might not have picked up on. But just the craftsmanship, there were so many cool shots that were, directly communicating important information visually. There was so much cool stuff done with the sound. A specific note that was awesome is like when she would put her soundproof headphones on and the sound would just cut out.
Yes.
Ugh. And I love that it happened more than once because it was just, yes. And then even beyond that, the music was so cool because it had this really classic kind of a crime thriller feel with orchestral stuff, but then it would switch and do some sort of a modern pop song, and it never clashed. It just all kind of meshed together the way that it should in a movie.
I am glad that you mentioned the headphones because I specifically had that as something that I enjoyed too. I feel like all the technology in this movie was presented in a very believable way, rather than, the way that movies traditionally handle it when they don't know what they're talking about, which is to have crazy UI animations and hide behind a bunch of jargon soup.
There were multiple characters where the technology was a relevant part of what they were doing, and I liked how they handled it in every single case.
So thumbs up, guys. One thing I want to ask is if you happened to notice who was credited as the DP.
I didn't.
Okay. It is a fellow by the name of Peter Andrews, who when you look up that name on IMDb, you discover that's Steven Soderbergh as an alias.
Of course it is.
And the reason I was looking up Peter Andrews was because I thought the cinematography was excellent. And I wanted to see who this guy was that did such a great job. And then, lo and behold, surprise, it was an alias.
I'm always impressed by directors who know how to do all the stuff because there's so many jobs in filmmaking, and that's the classic is that David Fincher is the guy that knows how to do everyone's job better than they do, which probably makes him very difficult to work for, but holy crap are his movies good. But that's awesome. I didn't actually know that. Good for Peter Andrews.
Yes. So another quirk of the cinematography that I just wanted to get your take on is that at least on 2 different occasions in this film, Peter Andrews broke the 180 rule. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I am fascinated that you asked me that question. Now, I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't notice. But the reason that I am so fascinated you brought it up is because Steven Soderbergh is also responsible for a show called The Knick. It was on Cinemax back in the day. Pretty sure it's on HBO Max now if you want to watch it. But it was about a hospital set in the year 1900. And it's dark and it's really good. But there is one time in that movie where Steven Soderbergh did something that absolutely drove me nuts. Where he had a character in a long hallway where the camera was looking one direction and the character was walking down the hallway the direction the camera was pointing. And when he got halfway down the hall, he moved the camera 180 mirroring the framing perfectly to look the other direction so that the guy was now walking straight at the camera. And I just wanted to punch my TV because it was like, what was the point of that? And also, I felt like you just slapped me. Like, why did you do that cut? And it wasn't even, I couldn't even understand the context. And it just came across as this, like, I did it because I could.
Well, you'll be pleased or perhaps displeased to note that one of the 180 cuts in this one was a walking shot.
Yeah.
When Angela is walking either left to right, and then it cut to a 180 where she was suddenly walking right to left. And I think I blinked at the exact moment that it happened, which made me even more confused because I thought she had turned back and was going the other way, and I actually hit my back button to go back see what had happened. It was that disorienting in the moment.
I bet. Just for context, was the scene, was there a tension in the scene that it supported?
Indeed. And so it could have been intended to give you a sense of unease.
Yes.
Or disorientation.
Which, to me, is the thing, is I think that technique being used in that way, great. In the context of the Nick, it just felt like, it's just him walking down the hall. Why did you just do that? Because it wasn't a chase, it wasn't rushing to something, but he's obviously a much better filmmaker than I am, so I'm not going to knock him too hard.
He can break the 180 rule as much as he wants.
Yep.
Far be it from me to correct him on it.
You got to learn the rules before you can break them.
That guy's forgotten more rules than the rest of us have even learned.
So another thing that I would like to compliment here is Zoe Kravitz and her performance. I thought she did a great job playing this character. I thought that she brought nuance to it that I appreciated. An example would be when her character is irritated with somebody, she hangs on to her syllable and goes up like that. And I like that because she did it multiple times, and it was one of those things that made me believe that person always talks like that when they feel this way.
Sure.
And there was a lot of stuff like that. I mean, I'm being too transparent here, but I found it very relatable with her being this person who has anxiety, who's an introvert, and my favorite thing ever, proper representation in a movie of a nerd who's uncomfortable around people, who is upset that she has to make a phone call instead of an email. This was a big moment. This was important.
Yeah. I can admit there were several things that I could relate to quite a bit in her character.
That was an excellent performance.
I would even extend that to the rest of the cast, who a lot of them we can't talk about until we get to spoiler territory, but I would just say basically from top to bottom, I think everyone in this movie did a great job.
So, another Soderbergh detail that popped up in this one is sometimes he likes to use comedians specifically instead of just traditional actors for parts. It's popping in my head that he actually did that in The Nick, because I remember there being comedians that were in like random character parts. But the movie where he really did that a lot was The Informant with Matt Damon. That movie, I feel like almost every single person in it who had a significant role that wasn't Matt Damon was a comedian. I know that's not totally true, but I want to say Tom Wilson is the guy who played Biff in the Back to the Future movies. He was in it. I remember Tony Hale was in that one. I feel like he's done a little more serious work since that point, but at that time he was like, oh, that's Buster from Arrested Development. And I love that he does that. It just sort of adds a flavor. So Angela's dentist that she video chats with was David Wayne, who is responsible for Wet Hot American Summer and Children's Hospital and a variety of other funny stuff. And also, Andy Daly was the guy that I'm assuming was supposed to be her direct report boss that had his kids screaming in the background. And it was just like, oh, there goes Soderbergh again with his funny guys playing parts that aren't funny. Just a totally random comment. It's really hard to run away from bad guys when you're the only person with blue hair.
Indeed.
Though it does look nice with an orange shirt.
I don't know anybody who would use blue and orange.
I know, it's such a weird color scheme. So I just wanted to take an opportunity and say, more 90-minute movies! This movie was 90 minutes long.
Yay.
And it just worked perfectly, and it just gave exactly the amount of time you needed to tell the story, and I really appreciated that a lot, because I feel like there are so many movies now that are over 2 hours, and you just like don't feel the need for all these scenes. Marvel, Star Wars, all you guys, I'm looking at you. I don't need a Thor movie to be 2.5 hours. It could be 90 minutes and I'll pay the same price for the ticket.
A wise man once said, perfection is not attained when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. Okay, we're going to have some spoilery things coming up, so if you want to see the movie, and we recommend that you do, you probably want to wait and come back after.
So our character Angela is scrubbing through all of this audio, and she hears something terrible, and it sounds like an assault. And then as time goes on, she does some hackery stuff and finds out more things, and then it turns out that it resulted in a murder, and now she's on the run, and the people from the company are after her. So, you know, we've got this awesome thriller with her being chased and all that sort of thing. You know, it keeps going, and she ends up to the point where she's been drugged, she's been kidnapped. I'm noticing the running time is running out, and I'm thinking to myself, how the heck is she going to get out of it? There's like no movie left for that to happen. Lo and behold, there was this guy that's across the street from her apartment where all these people are staring at each other. And we've seen this guy watching her with a pair of binoculars. Now this guy is someone you might recognize. Dan, would you like to tell the nice people who it is?
I am so glad you mentioned him because I also recognized him immediately, but I wasn't sure what I recognized him from. And it wasn't until almost the end of the movie when I finally was able to put my finger on it when Angela asked him his name, and he replied, Kevin. For those keeping score at home, if you were of the movie-watching age in the 80s or 90s, or if you enjoy watching classic Christmas films, you will know him as Buzz from Home Alone.
I did recognize him because I've seen him in a few things in recent years, but I could totally see how, you know, enough time has passed, it would be a little bit of a surprise.
He was familiar enough that it seemed like he was somebody I knew. Like, do I know this guy personally? No.
It feels like it. So the cool thing about his character was that he was part of that Rear Window homage because you had this creepy guy across the street that was watching, and then they did the nice plot twist of, oh, he shows up to help. That's how she's going to get out of this. But then I love that they even twisted it further and went, yeah, he was totally stalking her and staring at her.
Yes.
Which was 100% believable. In fact, part of me appreciated the way they presented it, where it was sort of like he's not necessarily like a terrifying murderer or rapist. He's probably just a lonely introvert that happened to see a pretty girl across the street. And like you do in the COVID, you stuck, I guess. But that kind of dovetails into what I thought was so great about the leanness of this movie and the script. Once you got to the finale, which, just for clarity, this guy just happens to show up to save her from the two dudes who are going to take her to her apartment and murder her, and then he gets attacked, and they go upstairs, and there's a big scuffle with a whole bunch of, you know, twists after twists after twists. And what was so cool about it is how many different things we'd seen in the plot that became relevant during the finale. I don't even think I could list them all if I tried, but she had phone calls with her mom. Her mom calls in the middle of the finale and she's able to answer it using Kimi. Her having a toothache makes her more vulnerable to the bad guy. And lo and behold, the construction above her that was so irritating that she was actually brave enough to get mad about is the thing that helped her save the day. And that's honestly about half of it. It just continues to go on. And it's a situation I love because there are so many movies where you dwell on something and then it just never comes back. This movie, I believe every single detail that they bothered to pay attention to became relevant in the finale. And that was an achievement.
Even little things like her giving advice to the contractor upstairs because her father was in the business, which then later explains why she knows how to use a nail gun.
I wanted to talk about the nail gun specifically for a couple reasons. Huge one for me is I detest when people use nail guns as weapons in movies without using them properly. Oddly enough, I have a very vague memory of the show Diagnosis Murder, which starred Dick Van Dyke. I'm old, but There was a scene where good guy's chasing the bad guy, and he was in a workshop, and he grabbed a nail gun, and it was like shooting and like hit the good guy with some nails. But I remember specifically that he was holding his hand up with something that he was bracing against the front. Now, for people who don't know, nail guns are very dangerous like most power tools. And because of that, they are basically all designed so that if you have them up in the air like a gun and you pull the trigger, nothing happens. They are designed so that you have to press the tip down against something, and then that's the safety, and then you can shoot the nail into the object.
Which is usually wood. Sometimes it's people.
All that to say, they took the time to show her use a piece of duct tape to hold the safety in place so that the thing would fire whenever she pulled the trigger. This is a great showcase of her dad being a contractor and her understanding that stuff, but also it shows how smart this movie is. And because I haven't talked enough about nail guns, I do have to throw one small criticism in there. I felt like the nail gun was just a little bit too lethal. The last guy she took out, he was going down like he was getting shot with actual bullets. And I think he'd be in a ton of pain right now, but I don't think he'd be death rattle.
In all fairness, you can't be a fan of the short runtime and then also want a guy to take 3 minutes to bleed out from nail gun wounds.
This is fair. Fair.
We got to take what we can get. It's a trade-off.
It's true. But hey, I give him credit. The first guy that went down, she nailed him right in the head, and it was like, well, if you were going to kill him, that's how you do it. But enough about nail guns.
Join us on our podcast, Power Tools with Aaron.
I am into woodworking. There was one moment in this movie where I thought it was going to go a certain way and then it didn't. After all the guys are dead and it's probably going to be okay, and then the boyfriend's at the door, there was the part of me that wasn't clear on whether she understood 100% that he was at the door, and I was like, please don't also kill him with the nail gun.
Yeah.
But thankfully she was paying attention. Getting into this movie, there was part of me that wondered, is this going to be like The Net for 2022? Which, in all fairness, I never actually saw, but I am aware was full of tons of cliches that now look just hilariously laughable. They did such a great job not doing that. Now, you already talked about how, they had computer screens that looked realistic. They had people who looked like they were actually doing coding. They actually showed code being written that looked like code. And, they did a really nice job there. But what I also liked was, I thought she was going to be way smarter than everyone else and be the super hacker. But then it turns out, actually, she's not a hacker at all. She literally just writes code. She reviews this stuff. She just knows computers. And she has to contact her buddy that does stuff in Eastern Europe, and he can get her the things. She knows what she needs, but she doesn't know how to get it, and he can pass it along. And then later on in the story, someone pays some super hacker in Russia or somewhere similar who's got his cool setup that's doing all the hardcore hacking, getting all kinds of information he shouldn't have access to. And I just wanted to throw out there that I loved the setup they had for him. Instead of him being the stereotypical grungy teenager with a hood on in a, disgusting environment, it's this guy who's clearly living with his mom in an apartment. Everything's clean and calm. He has his beautiful sort of mild OCD nerd perfect setup where everything is clean, and he's got his fun rainbow lights on all of his, keyboard and mouse and everything. It never felt gratuitous in any way, and I loved that.
So the last thing I wanted to mention is also the last thing we see, which I thought was another interesting choice by Mr. Soderbergh, was to end on a freeze frame. I felt like ending on a freeze frame was a little bit of an anachronistic thing to do. It's not really something that most movies nowadays do, and I thought that was an interesting choice on his part. I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on that.
It was funny, I thought. That's the best word I could use to describe it. It felt a little bit out of place in the sense that, much like we talked about earlier, everything that came across as homage still just sort of flowed into the modern era and just felt appropriate. And that definitely had this sort of late 70s to mid 80s weird, almost sitcom-y vibe. But I know Steven Soderbergh is smart. I know he knows what he did. And I think he wanted you to feel that way. I think he wanted to go, hey, it's okay. Like, that's kind of what I thought.
I do what I want.
Yeah, maybe an odd choice.
So if you've been watching this far, I'm sure it's not going to come as much of a surprise to you that it seems like we both give this movie a thumbs up, and we recommend that you go check it out if it sounds like something you'd be into.
Yeah, if I'm being 100% honest, I don't think there's anybody that shouldn't see this movie unless they're under 18. I honestly feel like this is a movie that everyone should watch. It's just so well done. Pretty much every single aspect of it is top-notch, and it is just such a great thriller.
And if you have already seen it and you have some thoughts on it that maybe we didn't cover, let us know in the comments.
That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.